Hi guys, this is 10 Points in 10 Minutes with Barb Nangle.
Hi, I'm Barb Nangle, and here are my 10 points. The first 3 are going to be my top 3 tools of recovery. So point number 1 is pausing. When I got into recovery, I didn't even know pausing was a thing, and it's the most important tool because I can't use any of my other tools of recovery if I don't pause. But here's the thing. When I learned that pausing was a thing, I was like, great idea. I have no idea how to do it. So here's how it worked for me. I was like, oh, that thing that happened 3 weeks ago, I could have paused. And then a little while later, I was like, oh, that thing that happened 2 weeks ago, I could have paused. So I saw the time closing between when I could have paused and when I realized it. And I got excited, like, oh my goodness, pretty soon I'm going to be able to pause beforehand. And that's actually what happened. And I think that process is the process of changing your behavior. This is how it happens. My number 2 tool of recovery is reaching out. And I mean that in 2 ways. 1, reaching out to my higher power, and 2, reaching out to other human beings. So I was a spiritual person before I got into recovery, but I didn't use God the way that I do now. I didn't reach out and say, please show me your will for me and give me the power to carry it out. I didn't say, please take this from me. I didn't hand things over. And when I started doing that, and I actually felt things lifted, I felt like I didn't have to be in charge anymore. It was just monumental. Lots of tension went away from me. I also didn't know that I ruminated, and so I handed my thoughts over to God too. And then learning to reach out to other human beings was huge for me. So I am at my core a recovering codependent. So I was the person people reached out to. I was the fixer, the saver, the rescuer, etc. So learning how to reach out to help with other people was just very, very humbling for me, because what I learned in that process is, 1, it was really difficult because I thought it was somehow weak. And embedded in that is the idea, 1, that weak is bad, which it is not, it's just weak. And number 2, that somehow asking for help is weak. And what I learned, and this is why it was humbling, was that I had this belief, at least on an emotional level, that I was somehow weak when I reached out to other people, which meant that when all those other people were reaching out for me, that I somehow thought I was stronger or better than them. Now, intellectually, I don't believe that, but on an emotional level, I did. And so that was very humbling to realize that, because it's actually strong to reach out to other people. If you picture one person walking down the street alone, and then you picture 10 people walking down the street holding hands, which is stronger, the people holding hands. My number 3 tool of recovery is keep the focus on myself. And I mean that in 4 ways. So in some ways, I'm a little bit cheating that I'm using 4 things for 1 item here, but bear with me. So number 1 way to keep the focus on myself is to ask myself, what do I really want here? I never asked that before. I was always like, what do they want? What do they need? What does the situation need? Number 2, what is my part in things? This is by far my greatest gift of recovery, is learning my part. Because if other people really are the problem, then I'm screwed. But when I learned what I was doing to either create chaos or exacerbate chaos, then I could stop doing it. Another way of keeping the focus on myself is to mind my own business. I gave so much unsolicited advice. I was basically violating other people's boundaries. So I learned to keep the focus on me and mind my own business. And then the 4th way that I've learned to keep the focus on myself was learning how to take really good care of myself. I think at its core, all recovery is about learning to love yourself. And one of the most important ways you can learn to love yourself is to take really good care of yourself. I neglected myself. I beat the shit out of myself physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. I don't do that anymore. My number 4 thing, game changer for me, I learned acceptance. So when I read the chapter in the AA Big Book about acceptance is the answer to my problem today, I didn't know what that meant, but I had been around long enough that I was like, these people know what they're talking about, so I'm going to pay attention. So the next time a situation came up where it was pretty clear, I think this is me not accepting, I was probably driving, because I had a lot of recovery from in my driving. And I used to get annoyed all the time. And so I was like, oh, okay, so this is me not accepting. So I didn't know what to do about it. So I just repeated the phrase, Acceptance is the answer to my problem today. Acceptance is the answer to my problem today. And what happened was all of the tension went away. And I was like, whoa, oh my goodness. What this means is it's not the situation that's causing all this tension, it's my thoughts. And when I dug into it, I realized that I had a belief that things shouldn't be this way. So let's say I was in traffic. That's probably what it was. My thought was probably there shouldn't be traffic on the highway, which was built for traffic. So what I found, my lack of acceptance was I wasn't really participating in reality. So I thought of it like I need to insert myself into reality. And the reality is there is traffic. So I would say to myself, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. And this ability to be accepting has changed everything. This is why it's in the serenity prayer, because it's so important. Number 5, this is a concept. I'm almost positive I heard it on a recovery podcast. And here it is. Info, not ammo. What this means is when you learn something about yourself, especially negative, that you take it in as information to learn and grow from. You do not use it as ammunition to beat yourself up. Because if beating yourself up got you to have a better life, you would be perfect by now, right? So it's info, not ammo. I realized when I got into recovery, even though I always had a high self-esteem and was a very positive person, I was basically looking for reasons to beat the shit out of myself my whole life. Not anymore. It's info, not ammo. Number 6 is another concept I heard about on a podcast. This is the concept. Flawsome. You are both flawed and awesome. So I somehow grew up with the idea that I shouldn't be flawed. And if I was going to, I goddamn well better hide those flaws from people. And that somehow, if I was flawed, I wasn't awesome. And so the concept of flawsome means that you are flawed in your awesomeness and you're awesome in your flawedness. So just because you're flawed doesn't mean you're not awesome. And just because you're awesome doesn't mean you're not flawed. And that was so, so helpful to me. Another really important thing, this is number 7 for me, is that intergenerational dysfunction causes something called relational trauma. So I am in recovery for family dysfunction. And when I got into the program, it was clear that I qualified, but they kept talking about trauma. And I was like, I thought trauma was like a blunt thing that happened to you, like you got raped or you were in a hurricane or in a war zone or something. And I learned over time this concept of relational trauma. This is where we are wounded in relationships because of the absence of good things happening to us. So I grew up in a family where I had food, clothing, shelter. My mom was relatively loving, but I was emotionally invalidated repeatedly. I wasn't allowed to have feelings. I was embarrassed and humiliated frequently. I was gaslighted. That stuff causes relational trauma, which is actually the root cause of so many people's addiction. So if you have been in recovery and sober or clean for decades and you still have all kinds of issues that you can't get at the root of, maybe you have relational trauma. Because here's the thing about trauma. You can recover and heal from it. That has been a game changer for me. Number 8, I learned how to form boundaries from recovery. First, by having them imposed from the outside by the traditions and that sort of thing from recovery and the practices like the no crosstalk rule and stuff like that. And as someone who was a people pleaser, rescuer, fixer, codependent, I often didn't know what I liked and preferred because I was so used to just doing what other people wanted. Well, what I've learned is the process of forming healthy boundaries helps me determine what my preferences are. And it also builds my self-worth. I mentioned before, I always had high self-esteem, but I didn't have high self-worth. And I do now. Because if I look at the history of my life, that is not someone who valued herself, who put herself in those kinds of relationships and situations and treated herself so poorly. So forming boundaries, absolute game changer for me. They helped me decide what I like and what I don't like, because forming boundaries is an experimental process. It's just by its very nature. And so you start to decide, oh, wait, I actually do like that, or maybe I really don't like that. And the other thing I learned in forming healthy boundaries is that there's a difference between hurting someone and harming someone. So I was always afraid, oh, I'm going to hurt their feelings. Well, there's something in, I think it's the AA 12 and 12, and it's actually talking about willingness, but it has this perfect analogy. There's a difference between using a needle, or excuse me, it says you can be willing to use a needle to take a splinter out of your finger. You don't have to want to do it. Well, here's the thing. It might hurt you to use a needle to take a splinter out of your finger, but it doesn't harm you. In fact, it heals you. Same thing with boundaries. It might hurt someone's feelings if you set a boundary with them, but it's not going to harm them. In fact, it might heal your relationship with them because you're being authentic with them. And then number 9, another concept I learned this from recovery, it's called bookending. The simplest form of bookending is essentially about having someone be an accountability partner. So you connect with them before and after you do something difficult. So maybe it's just like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym today, and then you text them when you get home. But you can also make bookending be something much more deep than that. And this is something I teach my boundaries coaching clients in terms of setting boundaries. This is especially effective when you have a very difficult boundary or it's the first time you're setting a boundary. And here's how it works. You need to work with a safe, healthy other person, such as a therapist, a clergy person, your sponsor, a fellow traveler in recovery. You connect with them and you have them think through what's the right boundary? What's the words I'm going to use? Do I do it on the phone, on Zoom, in person? When do I do it? And you have them affirm for you that you're doing the right thing. You're not a bad person for doing this. And then the day you're going to set the boundary, you contact that person. Maybe you call them on the phone. Again, they affirm you. They tell you you're doing the right thing. And they process all those difficult emotions that are coming up, because those emotions are the most difficult part of boundary setting. And then you go and you set your boundary with the target of your boundary, and you come back to your safe, healthy other person. And again, you process your difficult emotions with them. What this means is you are not left to hold on to all those difficult emotions by yourself, and you're not launching them at the person you're setting a boundary with. And you also know I am connected. There's someone else who knows where I am, what I'm doing, and what I'm going through. So bookending is just so powerful. And then item number 10 is a quote I still have on a sticky note on the mirror in my bathroom, and it's this. It's a myth that the outside world could give you satisfaction if only things went your way. Now, when I first read this, I didn't even know what it meant. I just couldn't understand it. And what it essentially means is we try to control other people and events and the world around us because we think if I had everything my way, then I would be okay. And it's simply not true. This is again about the serenity prayer. What can we control and what can we not control? And so it's in here where peace lies. You're going to be okay when you get okay in here. So the way that I do that is I practice these principles in all my affairs. In other words, I live in integrity. I stay clean and sober, and I keep things in my own lane. And I pray and I meditate on a regular basis. And I connect with other humans on a regular basis because we're protected when we're connected. And that's my 10 points.
And that was Barb Nangle with 10 points in 10 minutes. Look after yourself.